Welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm Cassie, and this is Asking for a Friend. Asking for a Friend, if you don't know what that is a place where you submit your questions and I track down one of our awesome therapists and get your question answered. So today I have tracked down Josh, and we are answering a question from an unknown friend in an unknown place. And the question is this: how do I deal with a younger brother or a son having a label, being labeled as bipolar? How can we offer help to a guy who's around 20, who's aware of his mood swings from mania to depression? And what is a biblical approach or a perspective on this? So Josh, take it away.
Yeah, good question, and one that a lot of family members have. Those that have someone that they love that are struggling with something, and they just don't know how to be helpful to them. And so let's kind of look at it from that angle. One of the first characteristics that I note about it that makes the situation somewhat helpful is that the person involved seems to have some acknowledgement of what's going on with them. Right? That doesn't necessarily, from the question, mean that they're willing to seek help, that they're willing to address the issues that they're facing and get help for those. But they do have a admission to or an acknowledgement that it's part of their experience and part of the struggle that they have. So I'm going to really talk through two different scenarios and some of the underlying principles underneath those. And the first scenario is going to be the scenario where the person is open to getting help, that they acknowledge that there's an issue, and they are actively seeking routes for treating and addressing what they've got going on. Now, in both of these scenarios, there's some principles of boundaries that apply. And the principles of boundaries would say this: it is easy when we love somebody to overstep our bounds. That is, that God has given us a limited autonomy or a limited sovereignty over our life. It's not unlimited in that, but He does give us both the responsibility and the ability to govern our life. And He expects us to do so, to exercise self-control as a fruit of the Spirit. What He doesn't ask us to do is to control somebody else, even if that's for their own good or their own benefit. And that's where we get sometimes as Christians in this hairy place, that we love somebody and we want to help them, and so we overstep the bounds of the limited sovereignty that God has given them over their life, and instead of exercising self-control, we try to exercise other control and try to get them to do what we believe would be best for them and their situation. Part of navigating situations like this in a healthy way are to have real clear understanding of what's in my yard and what's in their yard. What has God made me responsible for? What has God made them responsible for? And to know where that line is, and to stay in your own yard, to stay in your own lane. And even when that means the other person making choices that you wish they wouldn't. And it almost always does mean that at one stage or another. But God hasn't asked us to control the other person. God could control the other person. God's created lots of things in creation that don't have choice, that are controlled by His design for them. But God has chosen to allow people to make choices, even when they violate what He would desire for them, even to the extent of rejecting Him as their God and as their creator. And so if God's unwilling to control them, we really don't have the right or the authority to overcross those boundaries and for us to try to exercise control over them. So we need to allow them to make the choices that are part of their life, and to be clear on what's in their yard, what's in our yard, and really to have clarity in our own walk with the Lord as to what He would have us do as it pertains to this other person. Now, because the Lord knows what's really going to be a blessing to them and what's not going to be a blessing to them. And sometimes in our attempts to be blessing to an individual, we can actually hinder things. We call that usually enabling. That is when we do things that just enable the poor and bad behavior of the other person, enable them to not make the choices that they need to make in order to take care of themselves in a situation. We take responsibility.
So challenging to know what that is.
Absolutely. These are not easy questions to navigate through, and the application of the principles to specific situations can be really challenging and difficult. But that's just a broad, overarching principle that applies in all situations. When we are in a situation where a person is seeking help and is actively taking responsibility for their own life and making the choices, it's a lot easier as a parent to come alongside them and support them, encourage them to stay out of the role of trying to fix them, and instead be in their corner, be rooting for them, be a place for them to lean on, a place for them to be able to be safe, to share the difficulty of the struggle that they're in, to be a cooperative partner in whatever kinds of maybe therapeutic services or group services, group counseling maybe that they're engaging. Oftentimes as a counselor, if I'm working with an individual that's struggling through something like this, and them having supportive people in their life is huge in them being able to reach their goals. And so we'll do an assessment of who are the people that they have in their life that are safe and that are supportive, and how can we use those relationships to help you reach your goals by being able to work on things outside of counseling with those individuals that then will help you make it further towards your goals. So just make yourself available, respect their autonomy, respect them as an adult and their right to make decisions, even if they're not the ones that you would prefer that they would make. Use your yes and no judiciously to control the chaos in your life and to prevent resentment in your life, developing by saying yes to things that you probably should be saying no to, that on your side. If you're in the situation where you have an individual who doesn't acknowledge their need for reaching out for help, or is unwilling to take responsibility for that for themselves, the answer is it's a tough situation. And oftentimes there's very limited amount of things that you can do because God hasn't given you the ability to make them make wise decisions for themselves. And so one of the principles that we would apply in a situation like that is be careful not to absorb the consequences of their foolish choices. That if you absorb the consequences of their foolish choices, then you short circuit God's pain process that motivates us to change direction and do things differently because of the pain that we're experiencing. If they make the choice, but you pay the consequence, then there's no reason or motivation for them to change direction. So you want to kind of evaluate, are in the choices that I'm making short-circuiting God's structure and design for teaching us and redirecting us from foolish behavior? And if so, how do I step out of that? So though it be painful to see them experience things that we wish they wouldn't have to and that could be avoided, that we'd understand that them going through that is a process that they need to in order to get ultimately where it is they need to be to start taking care of themselves and making wise decisions in the situation. And so
God is allowing that process. We shouldn't short circuit what he's trying to do.
Right. God's work, there is a Holy Spirit, and I'm not him and you're not him, and trying to do his job in the life of others never works out very well. Yeah. And so we've got to be able to step back from that and allow them to make their choices, and to, have boundaries that place limits on the impact of their negative choices. And I say limits because it doesn't eliminate the impact of their choices, but it does minimize the impact of the choices that they make. and not put ourselves in a position of piling up resentment on our side.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, in a short little synopsis, those are some of the important principles that come to play in a situation like this, where you have a loved one who's struggling with something, and you are trying to figure out, how do I support them, come alongside them through that journey.
Yeah, that was great. And this friend is blessed to have a good friend like you that would look for a way to support him and be a help to him. So I just want to encourage you in that. If you have a question you'd like to ask one of our counselors, you can submit your question on our Asking for a Friend page. I will track one of our counselors down and get them to answer your question. And then we will post it on our Asking for a Friend page, and also in an upcoming edition of our weekly e-newsletter. So check it out there. Josh, thanks for your time. And Anonymous, thanks for your question.